Israel will not retreat. This was the message made very clear after the surprise attack that opened the failures of the powerful Israeli defense system. A ballistic missile fired from Houthi forces crossed all the protective layers and exploded dangerously near Ben Gurion International Airport, injuring civilians and raising a red alert at the heart of Israel's national security. Now the consequences begin to take shape, and they are serious. This attack was not just another chapter of the war. It may have completely changed the course of the conflict in Gaza and placed the Middle East on the edge of something much larger. In the early hours of Friday, sirens sounded around Tel Aviv. A long-range ballistic missile, fired more than 2,000 kilometers away, left the territory controlled by the Houthis in Yemen. He crossed the skies from various countries and hit the area near Ben Gurion Airport Terminal 3, one of Israel's most sensitive and busy points. The impact caused a violent explosion, injured at least 8 people and spread panic among civilians and military. But the most serious was that the missile went unharmed through the technological shields of Israel and the United States. Arrow 3 and TAD systems, considered among the most advanced in the world, simply failed to intercept it. The question now runs through the military and politicians of Israel and the US is one: how did this happen? The answer may be in a new Houthi strategy. According to military sources, the missile wore a small ogive, which would have deceived the Arrow 3 sensors and prolonged their reach. This, combined with an unusual flight trajectory, confused the tracking systems and made an effective response difficult. This technical failure rekindles an old fear that, even with billions invested in defense, Israel is not 100% protected. And their enemies are evolving not just with more weapons, but with intelligence and adaptation. The political response was immediate. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not hesitate to point his finger. He directly blamed Iran, calling the country a mentor and financier of the Houthis. According to him, Tehran is behind the attacks not only in Yemen but also in Lebanon, Syria, and, of course, in Gaza. This accusation gained ire in Israeli opposition and even in statements by former U.S. President Donald Trump, who took the opportunity to criticize the foreign policy of the current American administration and reinforce that, under his leadership, Iran would never dare to act like that. The Houthis' attack was not isolated. In recent weeks, the group has intensified its actions against Israeli ships and targets, in a clear demonstration of support for the Palestinian cause. But now the conflict begins to take a new form. A coordinated network of forces combined with Iran, Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in Gaza and Houthis in the south, acting in sync. This expansion worries not only Israel but also the United States and Europe. The fear is that war, previously concentrated in the Gaza Strip, becomes a regional conflict of incalculable proportions. And with the involvement of nuclear powers like Iran, the risk is not just local. It is global. Given this new reality, Israel's Security Office has decided to act. In an extraordinary meeting, a new war plan was approved to set aside the occasional attacks and leave for a prolonged occupation of parts of the Gaza Strip. The plan is simple and controversial: to move the Palestinian population to the south of the track and maintain full control over strategic areas in the north. Israel wants to suffocate Hamas, cut off his supply lines, and force a ceasefire agreement that favors Tel Aviv's interests. But this plan raises ethical, legal, and humanitarian doubts. The new military plan approved by Israel represents a drastic change in the conduct of war. The scene comes out of the surgical precision strategy, enters a prolonged territorial occupation approach. Thus, the government's intention is clear: to control Gaza physically, to press Hamas to the limit. The center of this plan is in the north of the track, where Israeli forces have already started land operations to take whole neighborhoods and vital infrastructure zones. The Palestinian population, for the most part, is being pushed south, a measure that, for Israel, is tactical but that international organizations classify as forced displacement. At the same time, the Israeli government authorized the convening of more reservists. Tens of thousands of soldiers are being called back to the front, even after they have already met extensive service periods in the previous phases of the conflict. There are reports of extreme wear between the military, both physical and psychological. Insufficient rotation, increased combat front tension, and uncertainty about the duration of the operation generate concern among experts. The military command fears that the troop loses efficiency over time, and the silent protests between the soldiers themselves begin to emerge, especially among those who have been through more than one call. This military escalation provoked a new division within the Israeli government itself. While a wing, led by hardline ministers, defends a permanent occupation of Gaza, another part of the cabinet warns of the risks of prolonged involvement that could drag itself for years and cost even more Israeli and Palestinian lives. There are those who are themed that this stance is to isolate even more Israel in the international scenario, removing important allies and strengthening the discourse of organizations hostile to the country. The backstage tension is evident, with tense meetings, leaks for the press, and public exchanges of accusations between members of government and opposition. Parallel, the Israeli government tried to introduce a new policy for humanitarian aid in Gaza. The proposal was simple: conditioning the sending of food, medicines, and fuel to the release of hostages by Hamas. This measure was immediately criticized by international organizations and even some allies of Israel, such as the United States and members of the European Union, which warned of the violation of international conventions. Hamas's response was predictable: no concession, and still accused Israel of using civilians as a bargaining chip in a war that has already left thousands of dead. On the Palestinian side, the humanitarian situation worsens at a rapid pace. UN reports point out that 90% of the population in Gaza is without regular access to drinking water. Hospitals operate with makeshift generators, without anesthesia in many procedures, and doctors have performed amputations in children without sedatives. Fuel scarcity paralyzes ambulances, and refugee tents offer no protection against the extreme heat of the desert. The population lives a total collapse. And in view of this, the feeling that the world watches silent to the suffering of an entire people is growing. And in the midst of all this, persistent rumors arise on secret negotiations between international powers and Egypt, which studies opening alternative routes for refugees. This possibility scares the Palestinians, who fear a new diaspora, something that would evoke bitter memories of 1948. For Israel, on the other hand, opening corridors to the exodus of the population could reduce international pressure and facilitate their military operations. But this solution is seen by many as the path to ethnic cleaning, a theme increasingly cited by analysts and activists. With the increase in casualties and the intensification of destruction, the risk that conflict is also increasing to expand to other regions. Hezbollah in Lebanon is already involved in scams at the northern border of Israel. Iran, which finances the group, declared unrestricted support to Palestinian resistance. And in response, Israel has been repositioning anti-missile missile batteries and reinforcing troops at the borders, including with logistical support from the US. The climate is maximum alert. As the Israeli tanks advance toward downtown Gaza, a new battlefront begins to form, not with weapons, but with narratives. The information war intensifies, with videos, audios, and images being frantically shared on social networks. Hamas disseminates scenes of destruction caused by Israeli bombing, while Israel displays images of tunnels found and eliminated combatants. The truth, however, becomes increasingly hazy. Network algorithms prioritize visual impact, not truth. And in this scenario, the world population is divided between twisting, hating, or simply moving away from complexity. In Tel Aviv, internal pressure on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu grows. Protests take to the streets demanding not only the return of hostages, but also early elections. Critics accuse Netanyahu of using war as a political maneuver to stay in power after months of wear with judicial reform and corruption scandals. At the same time, hostage families, who previously supported the military offensive, now require immediate negotiation. The government, however, remains irreducible, stating that it will not give in to terrorist blackmail. On the Palestinian side, the absence of unified leadership deepens chaos. The Palestinian Authority, headquartered in the West Bank, is seen as inoperative and delegitimized by much of the population of Gaza. Hamas, despite being the dominant force militarily, faces internal questions about the viability of their strategy. Many Palestinians, especially young people, feel orphans of political representation. They grow between rubble, with accumulated anger and no future prospects. This forms the perfect fuel for radicalization, something that both Hamas and even more extremist groups are ready to explore. At the international arena, the great powers play a dangerous chess game. The United States, despite being Israel's main allies, face increasing domestic and international pressure to demand an immediate ceasefire. China and Russia take advantage of instability to strengthen their influences in the Middle East, offering rhetorical support to Palestinians and positioning themselves as a counterweight to the West. Already countries like Turkey and Qatar try to mediate agreements, but bump into the intransigence on both sides. The world observes, debate, publishes resolutions, but little changes. And at the epicenter of this tragedy, families continue to bury their dead. Traumatized children draw tanks and bombs in the few remaining notebooks. Women are looking for their missing husbands among the rubble. Men try to keep up the little that has not yet been destroyed. The daily life has become a mini-Ned, literal and emotional field. In Gaza and Israel, humanity bleeds. And the more the conflict extends, the more distant seems any solution that respects life on both sides.